Hello and welcome inside the American Studios. I'm Morgan Uber, today joined by a very special guest, Commissioner Mike Aresco, who in December announced the end of this academic year he would officially be retiring, the one and only commissioner that this conference has ever had. Commissioner, thank you for taking the time to join us. And as you sort of reflect on these last 11 years now, when you think of the changes, the challenges, the successes, everything that the American has been through, what is the one thing you're most proud of?
Well, first of all, thanks, Morgan, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you here in the studio and talk about some of the things we've done over the years. I think I'm most proud of the fact that the conference has become nationally relevant. I think that's the main thing, and that our student athletes compete at the highest level. I never wanted them to feel like second-class citizens because of all the changes that happened in college sports and the way the conferences had to be restructured. I think that's probably what I'm most proud of, aside from, I think having a well-run conference that has great people, like you and others who are, do all the work. I mean, I'm the commissioner, but, without a great staff, you can't do much.
We're very lucky, very fortunate to have the team we do. When you think about, though, the job that you took over 11 years ago, there was certainly turbulence then, and all of the transformative changes, all of the years, and probably no more than the past couple years, all the changes that we've seen within college athletics. Is there a little part of you that wants to stay on and take on some of these challenges?
Morgan, I still have a few, even the last few months, because the CFP, college football playoff issues for the future are really coming to a head now, and they'll probably be resolved by the time I leave. In fact, as I said to somebody recently, I thought I could ease into retirement, but that's not happening. I was disabused of that notion. So, it's been pretty busy. I think I've been busier since I announced the retirement than before. But I'd have mixed feelings about that. Sure, part of you wants to continue the fight, and we have to fight for our place in the college football infrastructure. But part of me is really ready to go. I'll be 74 in May, and maybe something. I tend to look younger, so people didn't realize that when I told our board that I was ready to retire. But the point is, I'm ready. I've worked for 50 years. My wife and I would like to do some things that we haven't been able to do. I've got some grandchildren now. We want to travel. We want to do things. I did a piece. Somebody from Sportico called and did an interview, and they said, what are you going to do afterwards? Are you going to consult? Are you going to do something else? And I said, no, I'm not going to look back. I said, I used an example, Charles de Gaulle, when he resigned the presidency of France, and I think he died a few years later, but the point is he was nearing the end of his career, and he had an Irish ancestor, which I did not realize. And my wife and I stayed at a little hotel in Western Ireland years ago, and they had a plaque and a photo of de Gaulle on the beach there, and it said that he had stayed there for a couple of weeks when he went to Ireland, and he was retired, but reporters found out he was there, and so they trailed him on the beach, or a bunch of them, and they kept asking him questions about French politics and French government, and he turned to them and said, "Gentlemen, these are matters that no longer concern me," and he walked off. Now, obviously, I love this conference. If the conference asks me to help out, offer, they may not care anymore to get my opinion on anything. But if they do, I'd certainly be happy to talk to them. But I don't want to be, on call. I want to be able to travel, go places that I haven't had time to do. And I've been doing football for 40 years at ESPN, CBS, and now here at the conference. And football's pretty intense in the fall, and you have to visit all the schools, and you have to stay involved. I've never been able to do any traveling in the fall. Never been able to take a vacation. I think my younger son was in Paris on a work study thing while he's in college, and we visited him for a few days over Thanksgiving. I think it's the only time I ever did anything in the fall. And so it'd be nice, that's a great time to go, when the weather's good and the crowds are lower and everything's better. I've never been able to do it. So looking forward to something like that. I don't think, I'll look back, but if they want me to help out, I'd be happy to.
You've mentioned just your long career, 50 years, in the business, working at places like ESPN, CBS, as a television network executive. How did your time there really prepare you for the leadership and decision makings that you made while you were a commissioner here at the American?
That's a great question, Morgan, a great question. Well, first of all, I've been involved in college sports one way or another for 40 years. I started at ESPN in the early 80s, and I didn't do just college sports. I did 19, maybe even more than 19 different sports. I did Canadian football, I did bodybuilding, I did billiards, this is programming, yachting and tennis and boxing, I mean, you name it. We only had 4 programmers for the whole network at the time. So I think it's a process, you have to learn, you gain confidence, you start understanding the issues, and as you move along, I think you're better prepared for leadership. But when I talk about leadership, and I've done some guest lecturing at various schools, and annually I do a class with ECU, a professor at East Carolina, and they ask me about leadership. And I think the first thing I always say is, to be a leader, you have to want to lead. You have to, feel that you can do it and be prepared and do it. You have to make decisions. You have to decide that you don't mind being the point person. You don't mind where, as President Truman once said, the buck stops here. If you don't have that in you, then you probably aren't going to be a leader regardless, right? But in order to be a leader, you also have to have a certain level, I think, of experience, and you develop, I think, leadership qualities as you go along. And none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and you learn from them. And that's really it. I think as you go along, you meet all sorts of different people. You take what you think is the best from them, right, as you go along. And I was lucky, Morgan. I worked for some great people over the years. At ESPN, they had a really talented group of senior executives. And I was just a young guy in my 30s, working there. I was one of the older guys, believe it or not. ESPN they barely had anybody 40 years old, but I worked for, people like Steve Bornstein, who's had a really remarkable career in media, a fellow named Lauren Matthews who's passed away, and Lauren was, a programmer there, and I learned a lot from Lauren. And then, when I went to CBS, I worked 16 years for Sean McManus, who I think is one of the really great people who's ever led a broadcasting network, sports network. And he became a good friend, but also, I, worked closely with him and learned a lot from him over the years. So I've been around some really great people. And, you model your style. You can't pretend you're somebody else, but you can learn and you can adapt, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you even imitate a little bit, and then you eventually develop your own style. But you learn, how these guys operate, and it's been an evolution, I guess I would say.
And that TV background, I'm sure, had a little bit to do with this beautiful state-of-the-art studio, too, that we have now at the American. So fortunate to have this space. You've gone on record and you've said many times that even after you retire, you will have a rooting interest and really have a deep care, of course, for this conference. What is it that you really hope to see in the next decade here of the American?
We've had a lot of success, as you know, Morgan, and the conference has become nationally relevant, and it was really important that it do so. But I think in the future, it can reach new heights. I think one of the disappointments I have is that we did not become, an autonomy conference or an A5, and part of it was the realignment. I think we were poised to go to the board of directors. We had gone to the A5 chairs and written a lengthy letter, which I'm sure you've seen, and it talked about why we should be an A5 conference, what we had accomplished over the decade, and I think it was very compelling. We didn't really get much response because that's typical. The A5 has never really, looked at us with any kind of a welcoming approach. But we would have gone to the board, and I think we would have forced the issue because I think we belong. We're like them. We're more like them than the other 4. Nothing against the other so-called G4. I hate that name, as you know. But the point is, and group of 4 is what that means. But in the end, I think we belong, and I think I'd like to see us, even though we have lost some great schools, we've added some great schools, I think we can renew that push. And I would like to see this conference ultimately become, an A5, so that we're officially viewed as, quote, a major conference, even though we have always been a major conference. But we've had to struggle, as you know, to get that kind of attention and recognition. So I think that would be something I'd love to see this conference achieve. I would also like to see this conference continue its success in football. Now that we have an expanded playoff, I would love to see this conference compete in that playoff in football and show people what it can do. We've shown people what we can do on New Year's Day. We made the playoff once with Cincinnati, even though they're no longer with us. They did it in our conference. It was a virtual miracle, but they did it, and give them credit, but give the conference credit for building our brands, to the point where they got that kind of consideration. UCF should have been in it. I think over the years, Houston had an opportunity. Others, Tulane, we've had some great, schools. Now in basketball, I would also like to see this conference become far more relevant nationally in basketball, because it's always been a good basketball conference. I mean, we had Houston in the Final Four. We had Houston as a #1 seed last year. We had Cincinnati do well in our conference. We had UCF almost beat Duke in the tournament. We had, some great runs in the tournament, but we had a lot of heartbreak. We had a lot of tough losses. We were a good basketball conference. We slipped a bit, but we're coming back now. We've got great coaches. I'd like to see us really make our mark in men's and women's basketball. Olympic sports, I think, will always be good. I think we can get better. It's great. That doesn't command the attention, as you know. It doesn't necessarily move the needle in terms of how you're perceived as a conference. But I do expect us to exceed what we've done, and I think the new schools are going to invest. I think they'll end up doing exactly what the UCFs of the world, which didn't start out where they ended up, right?
Right.
And Houston, too, struggled for a while and became what they are. And think about it, UCF in 2015 was 0-12 in football. Had the Big 12 expanded in 2016, you remember that dog and pony show that they instituted for several months. They wouldn't have taken UCF, obviously. They might have taken somebody else, UCF, USF, whatever. The point is, they got back, they dusted themselves off, got back on their feet, and look what they've accomplished. But our conference did that for schools. You asked about the conference. I've always said, Morgan, that our DNA is competitiveness. That we don't want to take a back seat. But we are an unusual conference because we don't have geographical and historical roots. These schools weren't together for 100 years. Now, as you know, that's all been blown to bits to some degree with the realignment. But you still have a core of Big Ten schools that have always been together, a core of SEC schools that have always been together, a core of ACC schools that were together, going back 100 years. Pac-12, until it dissolved, had that group. Big 12 up to a point, right? A little less so. We never had that. We were a group that was kind of thrown together because of realignment, because of what happened to the Big East, and we took schools from different places, but we melded them into a real conference, and a conference that has cohesion. And that's, I think, to me, that was one of the real signal achievements of this group. And the schools got along. But the other problem is, of course, there's a pecking order in conferences. And I had really never been part of an organization where a lot of the schools necessarily would want to leave for greener pastures, but I fully understood it. And if you take it in the right way and take the right approach, and you deal with realignment with a certain, I guess, understanding and sympathy, you don't have the kind of battles and the kind of bad feelings that you see sometimes around college sports with realignment. And that is the kind of conference I want. I want people achieving. I want people striving. If they go someplace, fine. Wish them well, and then move on and continue because this conference provides a home for some really good schools. We've got great academic schools. Tulane is Rice and USF or AAU schools. We've got R1 research institutions. We've got schools that just, I think, are nationally known and do well. So anyway, it's been a great run. I think this conference can, to go back to your question, do more in the future. It can get to the pinnacle. I really believe it can. And TV-wise, we've got a great deal with ESPN. I think we can even improve on that. So I think the future's bright. I'll just watch from my sofa and root for the conference.
Yeah. I think if we know anything about college athletics, the only constant is change, and that's certainly to come over the next few years. But one thing that never changed was your fight for this conference and being able to vocalize that we did belong. And we want to thank you for all of the work that you put in here at the American. But one more question before we go. You mentioned the travel. You mentioned wanting to spend time with the grandkids. When you wake up June 1, what's that first thing that you have on your list of things to do when Mike Aresco retires?
Oh, I think it's arranging the move from Dallas to, we have a place up in Idaho in Sun Valley, and I think it's going to be, okay, all the checklist items for moving, There's an interesting story. It's a different era of the presidency, but when Harry Truman left the White House and he went back to Independence, Missouri, a reporter said, "Harry, what's the first thing you did when you got back?" And he said, "I took the suitcases up to the attic." And that's exactly what he did. I mean, in those days, you didn't have, 20 guys trailing you to help you do this or that. And I think my wife and I will have to figure out a lot of things as we move. We love Dallas, though, by the way, Morgan. I'm thrilled that we moved the office here. I love this area. I love the people. They're friendly and gracious and welcoming. It's been terrific to live here. But we're gonna move to Sun Valley, Idaho, and kind of just, as I say, disappear into the sage as far as I'm concerned.
Get out of these Texas summers, Texas heat. But
Ooh, that's the only thing about the living here. That summer is awfully tough with 110 degrees part of the time. But no, that I think also, when you wake up, that I don't know what it's going to feel like. Not First of all, I'll still probably get the emails until I can finally rid my email list. But it'll be weird waking up without 20 or 30 texts, emails, phone calls every single morning. There's always something, right? And it'll be odd not having that, but it'll also feel funny not just going to work, right? It'll be the first time in 50 years that I haven't gone to work, that I haven't had some kind of job, and that's going to be a strange feeling. But I'm kind of looking forward to it because it'd be kind of fun to just not have to worry about that and not have to worry about responding to phone calls, responding to emails, this issue, that issue. And, my wife reminds me, I'll probably still be thinking about issues with the conference and, oh look what happened. Well, why'd they do that? Or why'd they do this? Or, but that's normal, I think. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it's time.
Well, you deserve it. And again, thank you and congratulations on all of your accomplishments, innovations over the last 50 years in the industry and last 11 here at the American.
Oh, thanks, Morgan. The conference did it, not me. As I said, I never threw a pass or, made a basket. It was the tremendous student athletes that really define a conference by their achievements. And if it weren't for them, I couldn't have been able to give voice to what they did.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome, Morgan. Great to be with you. Thank you.